Today is May 12th, 2020. My name is Charles Suter, and in the next 5 minutes I'll be discussing with you the fifth in a series of irrational beliefs and the challenges to them. Previously I discussed irrational belief number 4, which I called should rules. This presentation is on should not rules, and you might ask appropriately, what's the difference between should and should not? Well, there's not much of a difference. Only the focus on my previous presentation was on shoulds as the cause of emotional distress. This presentation I'll be focused on should not rules as a cause to emotional conflict. What do I mean by should and should not rules? Let me just give you a brief example here. Many people might consider this to be a should or should not that they hold. Women should be feminine, and men should not be effeminate. Whether that's an appropriate or not should, or how much conflict it causes, depends. I just want to remind you at the very beginning that not only are shoulds and should nots a source of emotional distress, but also a cause of interpersonal conflict. Everyone tends to think that their shoulds and should not rules are right. However, everyone is wrong, and no one should consider their shoulds as absolute. Everything depends upon beliefs, situations, and interpretation. So I'm going to be presenting today how to deal with emotional distress or conflict when you can trace the roots to shoulds or should nots. Proposition 1. Both shoulds and should not rules cause interpersonal conflict as well as emotional distress. Everyone has their own should not rules. Some people might call these pet peeves. And violating someone's should not rules too often leads to conflict. But just remind yourself, all shoulds are negotiable as a means to not only your peace of mind, but as a resolution to conflict between people. Life is too short to be feuding with others because of arbitrary and debatable shoulds. Proposition number 2. Minimize your should and should nots, not only for your sake, but for the sake of others. That doesn't mean you need to eliminate all of your shoulds. Obviously, we need some guiding rules in our life, just not the ones that tend to cause frequent emotional distress and conflict between people. Just like should and should nots, limit your choices to conditioning rules. And by the conditioning rules, I mean the fact that you are today the product of all influences from society, culture, your parents, significant others, coaches, authority figures. So you stand here today as a conditioned person, and so is everyone else. So just remind yourself of who you are and where you came from. However, it's time to break away from childhood conditioning, becoming your own person, for those shoulds that cause you problems. Deliberately and mindfully create your own should and should nots. Do so deliberately. Now, if you find yourself suffering from emotional distress or a conflict and you can trace that to a particular should or should not, then that means you need to rationally challenge those irrational beliefs behind the shoulds and should nots. Remember, all shoulds and should nots are man-made. They're just opinions. They're not universal law, nor do they reflect a moral imperative. Other people should be permitted to think what they want, even if you don't like it. However, if their behavior causes you problems, you have the right to negotiate their shoulds and or their behaviors with them. But remember, the focus is on the shoulds. Other people's shoulds are a result of their own personal conditioning. It helps to remember that everyone is a fallible human being who are standing before you as a result of all prior conditioning. Also helps to remind yourself that everything is as it should be due to all preconditioning. So It's better to accept more and fight less. It's easier to change or soften some of your shoulds than it is to oftentimes resolve conflict with others. That brings me to my final conclusion here. A should-free life is a life without limits. Of course, you don't necessarily want a life without limits. You need some boundaries, some rules, some guidelines. Just make sure you pick the ones that don't cause a lot of emotional distress or interpersonal conflict. That's all for now. Remember to stay positive. You'll be happier, healthier, and live longer.